So quick survey. In one word, what is the most valuable thing that the church has to offer? Jesus. All right. I'll take that. Community. Love. What else? Hope. So none of you are wrong. Congratulations. This title is just pure clickbait, but thank you for clicking. I'm glad that you're here. My name is Isaac Everett. I was born in 1981, which either makes me the world's oldest millennial or the world's youngest Gen Xer. But I'm going to go with oldest millennial, and here's why. My older brother, who is just a little under 2 years older than I am, he lives with his wife and 2 children in a suburb, in a house that he owns. It's kind of the Gen Xer dream. And I live in the city, in a house that I don't own, with 6 other people, 1 of whom I'm married to, 5 of whom I'm not. And I have lived that way for most of my adult life. For me, saying that I'd like to own a house someday is like saying I'd like to visit Narnia. I mean, I probably would if I had the chance, but I'm not spending a lot of time knocking on wardrobes. And I often get questions from people in my life asking me things like, isn't it weird to live with roommates as a married couple? Or, when are you going to get your own place and live like real adults? And the secret is that my wife, Katie, and I are actually really, really happy. The last 6 years in particular, when we've lived in our current community, have been some of the best years of our lives. And we don't ever plan to live any other way. I believe that Christian intentional community, groups of people living together like families, intertwining their lives, intertwining the rhythms of life and disciplines of spirit, that it can change lives. And I believe that because it's changed my life. So that's us, by the way. There are 7 of us. I'm on the lower left. I helped launch this particular intentional community as a recent transplant from Manhattan, leaving behind a career as a musician to work half-time for a young, scrappy, and hungry congregation here at the cathedral called The Crossing. And there was a small group at The Crossing that met weekly to pray. And out of their prayers came a dream of living together, creating an intentional community, and they welcomed my wife and I into that dream. And over the course of the last 6 years, I became an Episcopalian, I became an Episcopal priest, and now I run an organization trying to reproduce and replicate that dream for other people. It's been life-changing. So CRESH is the Charles River Episcopal Co-Housing Endeavor. We're very proud of that acronym. And our mission is to create a network of faith-rooted, mixed-income, intergenerational co-living communities in partnership with Episcopal parishes. And that's a lot, so we're going to break it down. Rooted in faith. Believe it or not, every once in a while, a young adult walks into a church. And churches, who are often really great at welcoming young families, don't always know what to do when it's a young single person fresh out of college or fresh out of military service, maybe someone switching careers. It's tougher, and I know because a lot of those people ended up walking into The Crossing. And when you ask them what they're looking for, you usually get some variation of, I need an affordable place to live, I need a loving and supportive community, and I need meaningful ways to serve that align with my values. Now, the Episcopal Church's response to hearing that is usually something like, wow, I really hope you find those things. Meanwhile, Eucharist is at 10. And CRESH is an effort to actually give people what they're asking for. This photo right here is a view out the window of one of the bedrooms in our first CRESH community. It's in Newton Center. And the person who took it described to me the feeling of waking up every morning and seeing that visible, gorgeous sign of Christian community. Every single morning, waking up to that outside the window. One of the gifts that millennials bring to Christianity is that by and large, they're either not interested in church at all, or they're really, really into it. In prior generations, there was this whole group in the middle that kept one toe in the church because it's kind of what everyone did. There was a real social advantage to identifying as Christian, and so you did. But for the most part, at least in cities like ours, that social advantage is gone. And so that entire middle group is gone with it, and they're getting their needs met elsewhere. So that leaves the ones who are left, the young adults who are in church. They're the folks who are not interested in anything less than a fully changed and transformed life. It's why church attendance is down across the board, but clergy recruitment among young adults is the highest it's been in 40 years. It's a real gift. So we've got a generation of Christians for whom sitting in a pew once a week is just not enough. Ours is a generation that says, not just my feet, but my hands and my head also. I experienced this 4 years ago. I was working at the MIT chaplaincy while also working at the Crossing, and we had this idea of collaborating and bringing together a whole bunch of other communities in the diocese that were involved with young adult ministry and co-authoring an online Lenten devotional. One of the groups that we reached out to was Emmanuel Church in the Back Bay, because they're awesome and they do great work. And they got back to us right away and they said, we would love to be a part of this, but we don't have very many young adults. So we said, that's okay, just send us older pictures of people so they look young. And no, we didn't. Like, you've never cherry-picked pictures to make your church look good, come on. Anyway, that was in 2014, and soon after, those relationships that we built blossomed into something called the Boston-Cambridge Mission Hub, which is now Creche. And Emmanuel has been in the trenches every single step of the way, and we just launched an intentional community with them a few weeks ago in Alston. So this is Emmanuel 4 years later. At their parish picnic last spring, I counted over a dozen Emmanuelites between the ages of 25 and 35. I preached there 2 weeks ago, and while I was standing in the receiving line, someone who hadn't been to church in a while came up to me and said, wow, I came in and said, look at all these young people here. And then I realized they must be here because they wanted to hear you preach. And I laughed, and I said, actually, none of them knew I was preaching today. Your church is just growing. That's what it looks like. And Creche is not the reason that Emmanuel's young adult population has exploded. Only a few of those people are living in the Emmanuel house. Young people are coming to Emmanuel because it's a congregation that takes them and their needs seriously. Being part of Creche is just one way that they're helping young adults commit their entire lives to God. Second component is mixed income. I was having lunch with a friend recently who had recently finished a service year, and now they're unemployed and searching for a place to live, which is getting harder and harder in Boston. Rent in Boston is going up about 5% a year, and wages are going up about 1.5% a year. So renting in Boston, really hard. The average rent for a one-bedroom in my neighborhood, which is Jamaica Plain, is $1,700. And even if you can afford that, odds are good that you can't afford the upfront costs of first and last month's rent, a security deposit, and a broker's fee. That's almost $7,000. It's a lot to have in the bank when you're a young person. So my friend had been couch surfing for several months, trying to save up enough to get a room somewhere. It's brutal. It keeps people from establishing stable housing. It keeps people from building stable lives. For renters in Boston, it's a full-on housing crisis. Now, the difficulty is that if you're a homeowner, who are also the people who are most likely to vote and most likely to sit on community boards, if you're a homeowner, then the housing crisis doesn't affect you at all, full stop. In fact, it actually helps you because it causes your home equity to appreciate. Millennials, meanwhile, are spending between 35 and 45% of their income on rent, which is why my generation is only half as likely to own a home as my parents were when they were my age. It's also why home sales in Boston have dropped 12% over the last decade. People just can't afford to buy places to live. The whole system prevents new people from getting a foot in the door. It consolidates housing in the hands of professional landlords. It encourages short-term leases and high resident turnover. It advances gentrification, and it destabilizes neighborhoods. And if that weren't enough, it segregates the rich from the poor. It actively drives them apart, preventing the poor and the rich from forging relationships, from finding the likeness of Christ in one another. You know, Jesus never actually said there will always be poor people. What Jesus said was, the poor will always be with you. If you follow me, you will be with poor people. So I ask, are the poor with us? Not when it comes to housing, they're not. In Cresh's communities, some housemates make $12,000 a year. Others make $200,000 a year. We've got students, teachers, nonprofit administrators, journal editors, attorneys, bank auditors, child care providers. We've got folks who are underemployed. We've got folks who are overemployed. We've got folks forging deep, intimate connections with one another, intertwining their lives across differences that usually keep us apart. To accomplish our mission, we need communities that are stable, sustainable, and affordable. Communities in which people can grow real roots. Communities that can support them through the ups and downs of their lives and careers. Communities that allow them to live in the neighborhoods they love, while maybe also saving for retirement, or even being retired. This quote came from our most recent anonymous feedback survey. The person told us, "It is quite possible that without an organization like Creche, I would not have any housing at all. That is a life that has most certainly been changed." And a lot of buildings in Boston will designate a few of their units as affordable housing. But what we're doing is way more radical than that, creating mixed income communities of people who live together, love together, eat together, pray together, and grow together. It's a true vision of the kingdom. Intergenerational. Believe it or not, this is my favorite statistic, the two fastest growing populations in Boston are the 20 to 34 crowd and the 65 plus crowd. Younger millennials and aging boomers. And young adults and boomers have a lot in common, surprisingly. They both tend to have small household sizes. They tend to have limited incomes. They tend to report feelings of social isolation. And this makes intentional community very attractive to both groups and makes them surprisingly compatible as roommates. Psalm 71 says, "Do not cast me off in my old age. Do not forsake me when my strength is spent." It's a raw fear of isolation, and it's a very real fear in our senior years. And it happens way too often. Just like we segregate our poor, we tend to segregate our elderly to their detriment and to ours. And study after study has shown that living in retirement communities or assisted living facilities, it's not the quality of care that contributes to decrepitude, it's the routine of life. Living intergenerationally disrupts that. The spontaneity that comes from living with younger people has measurable impacts on longevity and quality of life. Seniors who live with younger people live longer, healthier lives. It's that simple. And it's a mutual benefit. In our first community, we launched primarily with people in their 20s and 30s, but about 6 months later, someone joined who was about 59, 60, somewhere in there. And from the outside, it was fascinating to watch because none of these people who had lived from dorm to Craigslist sublet were treating their house like a home. And then she moves in, and the first thing that she does is she paints her walls. And then the next thing she does is she hangs up curtains. And all the other housemates are like, why does your room look so much better than ours does? There are real benefits to living with people who are older than you and with people who are younger than you. It's also a vision of the kingdom. So back to the clickbait title. What is the most valuable thing that the church has to offer? Jesus, hope, love, community. Those are all true things. But in worldly terms, the church also has a lot of real estate. Property that we've owned for centuries, long before there was a housing crisis. But we're losing it. We've sold 15 parishes in the last 12 years. Most urban parishes sold their rectories years ago. And a lot of church spaces are underused or unused 6 days a week. It doesn't have to be that way, though. By renting, renovating, and repurposing church properties, we can create a way of being church that is both very new and very old, one that looks as much like a monastery as a parish. Creche partners with non-traditional landowners like churches who are partners in our mission. We not only offer rents that are about 35% below market rate, we nurture Christian communities that bring new energy and new vitality to their congregations, that bring stability to their neighborhoods, and loving, supportive community to their housemates. And you can help. 3 ways. First, you can repurpose property for mission. My main hope today is that when you return home to your own parish, you're thinking about ways that your community can mobilize the resources you have for new ministry. Just 2 weeks ago, I was meeting with a priest in a first-tier suburb of Boston. Her church has a rectory that they've rented for income for years, and she told me that she's been dreaming for years that they could transform it into an art space and intentional community, a neo-monastic witness anchoring their parish in their surrounding neighborhood. That doesn't have to be a dream. You can do that. Second, sharing resources. You can share resources with us, with other communities. If you have a property, you can rent it to us. We'd love to rent it from you. We'll make a community in it. This is how we ended up with a community in Newton Center. Trinity Parish came to us and said, hey, we own an apartment. We don't want to make an intentional community ourselves, but why don't you do it? And we did something together, and it's been great. Or maybe you have a property you'd like to sell us. That'd be amazing. Or even give to us to make sure that it's being used for ministry within the Episcopal family. I'm not here to ask for checks, but I would cash them today if you give them to me. Because most of our grant money is restricted from being used for capital expenses. So here we are with a housing organization that can't spend money on housing. The community that I live in, the one that changed my life, it exists because one of our founding members came into an unexpected windfall. And he said, I want to use this money to create Christian community. And everything that I have done since then, the things that we're doing, it's grown from that one humble act of faith. You can be a part of that. And then finally, you can join us in Creche. St. Bartholomew's in Central Square is an Afro-Caribbean congregation, with a congregation that is struggling in the face of rampant gentrification and community displacement. They don't have a property, nor the means to buy one, but we've raised $110,000 toward a down payment on a place for a St. Bart's house, and are actively working to raise the rest. And that's what's possible with an organization like Creche, when you have congregations working together. The income from 2 existing households with 2 existing congregations goes towards purchasing a third. And as we accrue equity, we can leverage that to purchase a fourth. And economies of scale make it easier and easier to accomplish our mission. And you can be a part of it. Thank you.